future. There are no people in the future. No people at all. There are no people in the future. Where did all my people go? There are no people in the future. Let me try my people call. Where are all my people? Where are all my people? I guess I'll fly away.
Hey everybody, it is Wednesday, May 26, 2021. Welcome to the newest edition of Raging Chicken's collection of podcasts. It's the Wednesday show, yes, with Cyril Mychalejko. He's progressive columnist from the Bucks County Courier Times and the Intelligencer, an all-around awesome guy. This show joins Out to Coop Live, our Monday evening interview show, and our Friday politics news roundup, which Sean Kitchen and I break down the good, the bad, and the ugly in state and national politics. You can, of course, get all of our shows by subscribing to our podcast on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And make sure, once you subscribe, you leave us a review. Give us that 5-star review. Leave us a review so other people can find the show. Helps other people find the show. The algorithm pushes us up there a little bit, right? You can do your little part. And you can support this show by becoming a patron for as little as $5 a month. Just go to patreon.com/rcpress. Your support has helped make today's show possible. And you can help out the show right now by heading over to our YouTube channel if you're not there already. And smash that subscribe button, like the stream for this show, and hit that notification bell so that you know every time that we go live. And make sure to join our Discord server to continue the conversation all week long and into the night. Just click on the link in today's show notes. You just kind of go right down in the show notes. Whether if you listen on the podcast, it'll be in the podcast show notes. If you're listening live right now on YouTube, watching us right now, boom, hit that link and you can join us in the Discord server. We're at the live chat channel usually during the show and usually hang out in the lounge later on. And a special shout out goes to Jonathan Mann, who wrote our intro song, There Are No People in the Future. You check out all his great stuff on his YouTube page and follow him on Twitter at @SongADayMan. That's with 2 N's, @SongADayMan on Twitter. Yes, it is the second episode of the Wednesday show. I think we're just settling on the Wednesday show. It's kind of like it's the Wednesday show because it's Wednesday. Today we'll be talking once again about Cyril's latest column, and this one, Only a Political Uprising Could Save PA's Higher Education System. Maybe talk a little bit about reclaiming our political imagination for organized action, and what stories Cyril is cooking up for future columns. And maybe if we get a chance, we'll check in on new reporting from Axios on Right-Wing Political Action Committee, or PAC, funding of school board elections, called the 1776 Project. And then there's, of course, the Keeping Kids in School PAC, which is active right here in Eastern PA. So much. So, Cyril, man, welcome, man. Great to see you again.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
Hey, you got it. So, once again, true to form, you've come out with a column which is upping the game on progressive discourse on the state system of higher education, what's going on with this consolidation plans of the state system, what's happening with the redesign plans, and so on. So for those folks who haven't had a chance to check out the column yet, why don't you give us a little kind of a window into kind of your reporting there?
Sure. I mean, I was just kind of like listening and reading about what labor and students, what their concerns were about Chancellor Greenstein's plans, and how this whole process has been, undemocratic. There's been really no transparency. And that's reflected in APSCOF's survey that they did with the 6 schools that are slated to be consolidated into 2 universities. I mean, a whopping 8% support consolidation, right?
8%. That's amazing. I mean, that's practically a majority, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like the problem is like Greenstein, right? And this is something that you kind of pointed out to me. He came here as a result of shopping around for the perfect kind of with the ideal conditions for him to kind of push through this like technocratic neoliberal, austerity reforms to public higher education in the state. why he's doing that. I mean, obviously, part of it's ideology. I know some of his writings were published at the World Economic Forum, so maybe he wants to go back to Davos and tell his story and kind of be the celebrity of the moment, based on the damage that he did to or he could potentially do to Pennsylvania's public education system. But all of this is part of it. We can't like place the blame just on him. Like this, there's been a long war against public higher education in the state,
Exactly.
dating back decades. The legislature's been starving the system with funding. I think there was a report by the Department of Education that showed between 1990 and 2013, public spending in Pennsylvania on higher education plummeted by 35%. Now, at the same time, get this, prison spending went up 137%, right?
Huh.
So
What a coincidence.
yeah, so we know that like investing in higher education reduces incarceration rates, right? So
Right.
when you're doing the opposite, you're increasing it, and then you're creating profits for the whole prison industrial complex, which you're actually putting the investments that you should be putting into public higher education too. Yeah,
Well,
and then
well, I think this is an absolutely critical point, right? Because I mean, on the one hand, there's Greenstein, right? And we need to look at who he is, what he's doing, where he comes from, and the fact right now he's basically telegraphing his next move. He's appearing on all these podcasts, he's going to all these forums, he's talking about the bold mission that they're kind of involved in, and the need to stand up and have courage in the face of resistance from faculty, students, community members, and basically everyone else but him, right? So that's important, but putting it in that context is critical, because I think, I'm reminded of, Naomi Klein's whole argument about disaster capitalism or the shock doctrine, right? Is that on the one hand, there's the shocks that come in terms of natural disasters, but then there's the created ones, right? The ones that are about bleeding dry those kind of public assets that create that sense of crisis where people are suddenly open to possibilities that they were not open to before. And I watched, for example, State Senator Judy Schwank in all of this, right? Somebody who's been a supporter of PASSHE and is on the education committee. And some of the latest hearings, she's been actually kind of out there being like, well, let's see how we can tweak this. Let's take into consideration, like, it's like she's been sipping on that Kool-Aid a little bit. So, I mean, you can't have, and in some sense, Greenstein can't come into Pennsylvania and be successful in these projects without that kind of 40 years, 30 years of bleeding dry of public higher ed. So I think that is such an important point to kind of just underscore in your piece.
no, absolutely, and then look at like more recently, like after the Republican recession of 2008 with the Bush administration, those trends, continued to drop. I mean, like Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. I think the report was released in February, said that between 2008 and 2019, that drop continued by 33.4%. And so what happens, like the burden of the cost of higher education shifts to tuition, right? And that's placed on the shoulders of working class, poor, and communities of color. These students and families, they are shouldering the burden of a system that's supposed to be a vehicle of social mobility for them.
Exactly.
So like right now, it's just like if you look at tuition fees, room and board, etc., that accounts for like 34% of the median income of all PA families. And if you like break it down by race, for blacks, it jumps up to 56%, Latinos 48%, which is worse in the nation. Like Pennsylvanians should be not only embarrassed, but outraged, right?
Yes, absolutely. And, and I think that what I found about your piece that was especially absent or from the public discourse, right, in terms of the way that this has been reported on and very much in the way that it's been I even made sense of by some kind of constituents, right, including kind of say whether us within the as faculty members, as students or community members, is that somehow if we just kind of are able to push on the process a little bit, we're able to kind of get these facts out or get our word out that's somehow going to change direction. But you make this point, right? I mean, not to kind of give the kicker here, but I'm going to give the kicker. You say like, just I want to kind of look at the end of your piece here, and you say, it goes right to your title, right? It says back in 2018, educators in red states such as West Virginia, Kentucky, and Oklahoma engaged in wildcat strikes to make their demands met. There's a thought, right? And throughout this piece, you're basically making this point, right? Not saying like, okay, everybody just wildcat right now. I mean, that's not the thing. But the whole idea is that it's this organized resistance is the only thing that's really going to get the goods in this case.
No, absolutely. I mean, on the one hand, like you said, like, yes, of course, you have to engage in the process, right? And try to kind of like get your message out. But, Greenstein made it apparently clear, with his mafia tactics when he said, well, if you don't do what I want, then I'm going to ask to dissolve the system. So, like, that's what you're working with, right? So if
Exactly.
he's being clear. I give him credit for being honest, right?
Yep.
Those are his tactics, right? So you have to fight fire with fire. And so, what I talked to you about was kind of like this movement moment that happened like back in 2016, when the faculty and staff went on strike successfully, and about all the like the organizing across unions, across departments, student solidarity, walking out in solidarity with faculty, engaging in other actions across the state. And this is the type of thing, unfortunately, like that didn't continue, and this is
Right.
what needs to happen. That needs to be sustained. It can't be like just like issue by issue reactionary. It has to be a kind of proactive approach. And we have to engage, like you said, in the community too, because Greenstein's plan akin to factory closures in a lot of these communities, based on the what is it, Political Economic Research Institute report, or the
Yeah,
Perry
the
report.
Perry report out of UMass. Yeah, exactly. And you were talking about like the total, direct job losses of over 1,500 job losses. You're talking about the secondary impacts, that is the impacts in the communities that brings those job losses in the state over 2,200 people. I mean, that's absolutely huge. And so the question is that, if we want to prevent the plant closures,
Yeah.
right, in terms of the job losses, then how do we do this? I mean, on the one hand, you need the inside game, right? And if you look at the history in social movements, that this has been, the way these things work is that you've got the inside game, you've got people that are kind of, are doing the negotiations, kind of following through, making the case, going to public hearings and things like this. But that doesn't win if you are, if the other side is not playing the same game. So the only way that you gain power when you're the kind of ones who without the power, right, is to have the people on the outside pushing hard, right? And we can look at from the history of like the American Revolution, we can look at the Civil Rights Movement, we can look at suffrage, we can look at I mean, name your social movement. Right. And you've got this inside outside strategy, which is absolutely critical. And, one of the things that I found interesting is we talked a little bit about this before the show, and in Red State, Blue State, right? In Eric Blank's piece, in that book, I mean, not Red State, Blue State,
Red State
Red State
Revolt.
Revolt, Red State Revolt. I'm sorry, Red State Revolt, where he documents this uprising of public school teachers, right, kind of across the states of, say, Kentucky, and kind of throughout areas that were many cases work right to work, and the unions initially were fundamentally opposed to what they were doing, right? They're like, oh my God, until they found out that they were being successful. And then the leadership got on board, right? And so I think that there's this kind of dynamic too as well, where the movements can actually show what's possible, what's political possible, and to kind of expand our imagination of how we think about being successful in organizing. And I think that's a really kind of important lesson to kind of revisit if we're going to have, Naomi Klein again talks about the need to build muscular movements, right? Which means you need to practice, you need to exercise those muscles, right, in order to be strong when it comes to kind of critical points.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I would recommend the book for everyone because there's a lot of lessons to learn about like organizing the processes and the value of it, because as individuals we're powerless, right? It's only when
Right.
we kind of build unity and solidarity and engage in political action, that our voices like really get heard. And these red state revolts in West Virginia and Arizona and Oklahoma, they weren't spontaneous, right? Like teachers were kind of like working
Exactly.
up to that, right, for months, working through kind of contradictions and disagreements, and in the end, it was uprising, right? Because you had Republican support, Democrat support, uh, white people of color. Obviously, everything wasn't perfect, right? And there's still some issues, but there's still, like you said, like the organizing and the direct action, it got the goods. And another thing to remember is just, we shouldn't look at just like, oh, these are like backwards, like red states that aren't like taking care of our teachers because we, in education, because we know in Pennsylvania, in the liberal Northeast, we're dealing with the same exact issues. And while we can place a lot or a majority of the blame at the feet of Republicans, we have to remember that there's been a shift to the right by Democrats, starting with like Clinton in the 90s, and that continued with Obama, with regards to austerity, taxation, as well as the privatization of education.
Absolutely. And so, again, this is all speaks to, what we've talked about as kind of as long as Raging Chicken has been around, right? Has been the focus on kind of community movements, right? Of building kind of solidarity and, that kind of that line, which you hear us say over and over again is direct action gets the goods, right? And that is not a dismissal of the absolutely critical work of getting progressives elected to office, right, of doing the insider kind of negotiation strategies that you need to have effective, say, contracts at a union kind of situation. But the idea, it's a theory of power, right? And the theory of power is that if we want to enable our progressive legislators, if we want to enable our union leadership, if we want to kind of enable, say, any sort of progressive future, then we need to be having that concentration and the support of the kind of movements on the ground. And I don't know if you caught any of this, but on our Monday show, we had a couple people call in, and it was great. I had Nick Marcel, who's from Westchester University, a couple weeks back, along with Alex Carlesis about their piece about neoliberalism and higher education, and they started this group called PASSHE Defenders, and we kind of connected them up with a KU activist group, right? Students are doing activist work at Kutztown University, and they got together in their meeting last week, right? And they're looking to expand their organizing, right? And in some sense, this is precisely what we had working with the PA Student Power Network before that kind of like fell apart for a variety of different reasons. But I think that's the kind of model we need to, but also including faculty and staff and community members too as well.
No, I mean, absolutely. Like that the work that they're already doing in the short time that they began has been incredible. And this is where you have to start. And I mean, the message is really simple, right? Fund our schools. That's it. Like that's what you want. That's what you're pushing, and then that lifts all boats. That helps everyone. Like when you have an educated citizenry, they're more engaged in the democratic process. They earn more. They're paying higher taxes to fund these kind of like social programs and social goods, right? Um, and so it's about what they're doing and and what's happened before and what needs to be re-engaged is just kind of like creating this kind of culture of not just resistance but just kind of like being engaged in your life, right? I mean, there was one quote from this high school student in Oklahoma in Red State Revolt by Eric Blank, saying like our teachers are setting an example of bravery by standing up to ignorance and inaction, right? So this is like, in doing this is almost like a civics lesson, right?
Exactly.
For everyone involved, including the community.
Absolutely. So, I mean, 100%. I mean, this is why, and we've talked, Cyril and I talked a little bit offline too as well about, in future shows down the road, once we get this kind of going on, to begin start looking at some of these folks that are doing that kind of work, like Eric Blank, right? And the possibilities of bringing some of those voices into the show, to kind of really kind of deepen out that whole question about power, right? This is one thing that Saul Alinsky said that, there's, all sorts of contradictions in Saul Alinsky's work, but one of the things that he always talked about is the need to talk about power, right? And what's the theory of power? Because not only is we have to be thinking about the messaging of fund our schools, right? We have to be thinking about the unsaid of that statement. And if you don't, what? Right? And that's on us, right? To think about what's the consequence that is associated with that. What happens if they don't do what we're asking of them to do, right? And I don't mean like the kind of garbage that we see with like the insurrection stuff in January 6th. I'm not talking about that, but I'm talking about organized, nonviolent kind of social movements, right? And how you begin to organize that for political power. So, I think that, one of the things I just want to bring this up quickly before we talk about your, what you got in the hopper, or kind of where you go from here. I just was, to see reporting start coming out this week. Axios had this piece that just came out yesterday about the right wing PAC that is funding school board elections. This is the 1776 Project, the kind of anti-critical race theory and all this stuff. And again, once again, we see these networks of billionaire donors that are getting involved with school board elections. And I'm thinking like, yeah, there you go. Like this is clear why Cyril's paying so much attention to what's going on, like in these school boards, why you're kind of on your Substack, why you're making sure to highlight these progressive school board candidates across the area. And now we're finding out even more about this Keeping Kids in School PAC that's active right here in Eastern Pennsylvania. If you go to their website, there's a link in the show notes. You can see all the candidates they're supporting. And guess who they're supporting? QAnon folks, right? The right-wing extremists, right? The kind of deniers of the anti-maskers, right? All these people are being supported. So, I mean, so kudos to you to kind of getting out ahead of that, and digging down into these school board elections, because it's absolutely critical.
No, yeah, and thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's not only critical, it's just dangerous, right? I mean, like you said, like who wants like QAnon folks, like pro-insurrectionists, pro-big lie folks, like setting curriculum, right, and education policies for our schools?
Well, I can tell
Where
you in my district, right, in the Penridge district, I can tell you who wants it. The Republican Party wants it. Republican voters want it. I mean, they just kind of they handed the nomination to a QAnon supporter, right,
correct.
to Chaikin. So we know that there are constituents out there who are pushing for this stuff. And again, this is the power politics of school board. Anyways, I don't want to get us kind of too far afray here, but
Sure. No, yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like I said, like there's very like dangerous people like running locally. I mean, dangerous like with their like warped ideas and ideology, from their bigotry. And I think there was one, the woman running in Palisades, Cora Landis, was just like posted an article like, what if the progress progressives brag about is leading us to hell, not heaven. Um, these are the type of people that we have to contend with, and like this is why it's so important. Like we need to get involved in like all sorts of races. Like we cannot take anything for granted, right? From school board to state rep to U.S. congressional representative. Like we need to try to find the time, or if we have the resources to share, to kind of spread that kind of love and solidarity across the board.
100%. And all the more reasons why, and again, Cyril and I decided to be even doing this show, right? The idea is that we need to be kind of supporting each other, right? And kind of, kind of lifting up all our voices and expanding our networks. And so that, we're able to kind of have multiple eyes on one thing and it's not all on somebody's back if we're going to have sustainable resistance going forward. So let me ask you this then. So what do you got going on in the hopper, right? What's you got
Sure.
cooking over there in the kind of the Cyril, workshop, as you will?
Yeah, absolutely. So, transportation and infrastructure is a big issue, not just nationally, but here in Pennsylvania. It speaks to us dealing with climate change. There's economic implications, job implications. So right now in Pennsylvania, funding for transportation that began in and I think it was like 2013, is set to expire in 2012. So I'm going to be talking about how there's this kind of like blue-green alliance to try to push Harrisburg to start working on legislation now so that we have something lined up so that we can not only like maintain the public transit systems that we have across the state, and obviously this is like big for like Philadelphia and the suburbs, but it even that even kind of like it impacts communities like across the state, like from
Sure.
Allentown, and obviously like big urban areas like Pittsburgh. So what we need to do is we need to find funding that's not only going to maintain it but expand it, because we see that this is again, it's a working class issue, right? This public transportation disproportionately impacts working class and communities of color, as well as like air quality, right, which has to do with
100%. Yep.
lack of public transportation. So
Well,
that
and on this score too, as well, if you remember when Biden came out to Pittsburgh to give his got a big infrastructure talk and things like this, one of the graphs that got rolled out was about these train lines, right, that have been underserved or had been kind of taken offline for a while, that that infrastructure plan could directly impact, right, into bringing some of those train lines back online that weren't serving just kind of like the main line of Philadelphia, but were actually serving people in central Pennsylvania, right, in the Lehigh Valley, and so on. So some of the legislation that's being proposed in the state too, to be able to say, okay, if this infrastructure bill gets planned, to basically get it in place already, right? Kind of what you're alluding to, get it in place already about where this money goes. So don't leave it in the hands of these kind of like right-wing nut jobs over here, excuse me. But let's actually plan ahead of time so that we can get right to work. So
absolutely, yeah, and I mean, and it should be something that's like bipartisan, right? Like the only reason why, especially like
totally.
for like suburban, Republican state senators, etc. This impacts their community. So if they're actually like serving to represent their community, they're gonna place this or prioritize this above any kind of like partisan hackery that they might have in mind to kind of make Governor Wolf like a lame duck.
I agree, especially when you have communities which are going to see they're going to be able to see what the direct impact is going to be, and it's going to be extraordinarily hard for a legislator like a central PA or the Lehigh Valley or something like this who's a Republican to sit there and say no, I'm against it, right? It's an easy win for them, right? Just to be able to kind of say you're supporting the community if they want to hold on to political power, and it's a way, like you said, as a potential bipartisan kind of approach to it. So excellent.
Great.
Cool. So infrastructure it is. Fantastic. So, man, any other kind of closing thoughts you got on the what's going on this week in PA?
I mean, I was thinking back to those, the amendments that like stripped Governor Wolf of, his emergency powers.
Yeah.
And if you think about it on this off year, it's like maybe about 13-14% of the voting population decided to change the Constitution.
Yep.
Right? So maybe there needs to be a different approach with that. Maybe if we're going to change the Constitution, that should be in a presidential election year when you know that you're going to have like maximum turnout. It doesn't surprise me that the Republicans, put this forward now, right, rather than in
Totally.
November.
No, and it also I think it actually shows some of the gap between what we see in our social media feeds versus who's actually turning out and who's kind of aware of these things. Because I have to say, if you just followed just what was happening on Twitter or what was happening a lot of social media, I think there was a lot of organizations, a lot of people that were doing an excellent job of communicating, like no, no, yes, yes, right, on those first four things. And I think that was better done in the social media space than I've seen it done before, which is great. But it also shows you the folks that are turning out, right, in those elections are not necessarily on Twitter all day long, right?
Yeah,
And we know it's too, as well as actually the people who are turning out, even if they're people who regularly vote and are kind of well interested, the way that they word these things is designed to trick people, right? So if you don't know anything kind of going in there, you're doing your best guess, right?
yeah, absolutely. And just like, there's limits to collectivism, right? And social media organizing.
Absolutely, 100%. 100%. Well, excellent. Well, Cyril, man, this is great that we're going to be doing this more often.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and this is going to be part of our regular feature here as part of the Raging Chicken family of podcasts, right? We're going to be see a bunch of changes that are going to be coming up. I've already kind of telegraphed some of this stuff to y'all about changes on the website where we're going to bring everything together, so it's going to be easy to find all the different podcasts. Looking at ways that, say, for example, if you're really interested, you only got a half an hour, because we're going to try to keep the show at around a half an hour, maybe 40 minutes tops, just so it's kind of easy to kind of listen to, easy to kind of come in. And we're looking for ways of kind of setting it up so that if you want to pull in just this podcast, like just for the Wednesday show, you'll be able to kind of listen just the Wednesday show. For now, you'll be able to find all of that. They are sorted, so if you actually went to our Podbean thing, you can actually just click on the Wednesday show, and it'll sort just the Wednesday shows if you want to see those. But this is I'm very excited. I'm very excited about this, and I'm excited about what this actually means in terms of establishing some even a stronger presence right here in Bucks County, because I think this is going to be a bellwether county going forward for quite some time.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, Cyril, take it easy. Well, thank you all for tuning in. Thanks for jumping on the YouTube. Make sure before you leave today that you hit that subscribe button, that you like this stream, and you hit that notification bell so that you know every time we go live. We will be back. Are we doing this next week? We coming back next week? Or we're going to do 2 weeks again?
Sure, let's do it.
All right, let's do it. We'll see you next week. This is how we roll, everybody. This is how we roll. All right, this is Kevin Mahoney, editor and founder of Raging Chicken. Thank you all for tuning in. And don't forget to join us this Friday for our politics roundup with Sean Kitchen about the good, the bad, the ugly in state and national politics. And for next Monday, we'll be back to an interview show. So we'll see you soon. See ya!